On Friday, April 24th, this is South Texas Midday. I'm Spencer Chiak. Earlier this week, Corpus Christi City Manager Peter Zanoni announced that the city will require 25% cuts to water usage across the board in September, when a Level 1 water emergency is anticipated. In collaboration with the Texas Newsroom, Inside Climate News reporter Dylan Bador took a look at trying to answer what that exactly means and what life will look like for residents in a Level 1 water emergency. He's here now to discuss more. Dylan, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, for a homeowner, how much water is 25%?
Well, so it starts with they have a baseline of 7,000 gallons per month is what they assume a homeowner would use. So a 25% cut from that is less than 6,000 gallons per month. However, what they said at the city council meeting is that the majority of homeowners already use less than that water. The majority of homeowners, 70% in Corpus Christi, already use less water than what the allocated cut would require. And that's because over recent years, as you know, folks have stopped watering their lawns and washing their cars, which are actually the biggest residential water uses. So there are a few households, well, there's 27,000 households approximately in the city that use above that water usage, and the city plans to investigate and find out more about them, who they are, why they're using more before coming up with a policy. But bottom line is that for the majority of people, when it comes to showering, brushing your teeth, using your water, it's not going to be that much different than life in the last year.
What about for schools and emergency services?
That's where we're getting into bigger questions, and they're not necessarily answered yet. Yesterday, the Corpus Christi Independent School District told us they did not plan to cancel classes during a water emergency and that they're drilling their own wells. They're drilling 3 wells at the sports complex and 2 at middle schools, which they plan to use for potable water. You know, the biggest uses of water in a school is now toilet flushing because they're no longer watering sports fields. And, you know, at big middle schools, that's a lot of toilet flushes during the day. So they are going to be thinking hard about what to do about that, and the answer's not here yet.
What about when it comes to emergency services and hospitals?
So the 2 hospital districts of Corpus Christi are also drilling their own wells, emergency water wells. Well, they're not drilling. They're seeking permits, and they're beginning the application to drill those wells. And city has indicated that there will be carve-outs for emergency services like hospitals, but those have not been specifically outlined yet. And, you know, the important thing, I guess, overall to say here is that these 25% cuts is a voluntary measure by the city, essentially. So it's not a hard water shortage yet in that there's not enough to go around. It's saying that on this date, we're going to implement emergency conservation measures. So in any case, it's possible that when we get up to that day with the hospital, it's not like in September the water runs out. In September, they say we have to start doing these things willingly. It's 6 months after that you get to a point where there's no longer a choice. Now reality has caught up to the situation, and there's not actually enough water for everyone. So that is the threshold they're trying to push out as much as possible by starting to reduce use in September.
And when it comes to the industrial users using more than 50% of our water, that 20% cut, how much do we understand what they're going to do?
We have no idea what they're going to do, and probably won't until this reaches emergency levels, because those are big, powerful private businesses on a global level, and the details of business operations aren't something they're accustomed to disclosing as far as what products they're going to cut, what units will be shut down, what sorts of adjustments they're going to make on the balance sheet to make this work. But that is certainly the big question in the room. And the data the city presented on Tuesday, what it indicated is that these 25% cuts they plan to make, they plan to reduce demand by 15.7 million gallons per day. They anticipate that 0.0 of that will come from residential users. The people have been squeezed for everything they have to give when it comes to water, and there are not significant reductions left for them to make. So if the city is going to hit those conservation targets, it's going to come practically entirely from these large volume industrial users. And what I understand is that they have been quietly working on plans for many months for this situation. It's just not something that they, present to the public.
Looking ahead to next week, are there any major events or any expected announcements people should keep an eye out for?
No big announcements. The discussion will be continuing. The rules that they proposed were only proposed rules. They know that they do plan to make these 25% cuts, but exactly how they're going to get there and what the rules will be are up for discussion. And then in the upcoming weeks, I believe there's also more action planned on the Inner Harbor desal project in the City Council. Inside
Climate News reporter Dylan Bedore, thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks for having me.
You can read more of Dylan's reporting at InsideClimateNews.org and KDT.org. On Wednesday, Baylor University hosted both a stop on Turning Point USA's national tour and a progressive alternate event known as All Our Neighbors. The two gatherings, held just steps apart, reflected different perspectives on politics, faith, and community. KWBU's Molly Jo Tilton reports.
On Wednesday, Turning Point USA's national tour made a stop at Baylor University. Featured guests included Border Czar Tom Homan, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, and political commentator Benny Johnson. The event was sponsored by the Baylor chapter of Turning Point USA and originally promoted as being open to the public, with tickets offered on a first-come, first-served basis. According to the national organization, thousands of members of the public filled out the interest form for the event. Mitchell, who traveled to Waco from Longview, was one of them. He was accompanied by members of his church and a 12-foot cross.
We were walking the campus, praying for students.
That's when he got the notification he wouldn't be able to attend Wednesday's event.
I got a text at like 3:35 saying that it was closed off to the public, so that was kind of a bummer.
The organization blamed Baylor for the last-minute change, but in a statement to the Baylor Lariat, the university said the event was always meant to be for students. Baylor officials said 438 students attended the event based on ticket scans. That led to portions of Waco Hall, which has a capacity for over 2,000, to be blocked off for the event. At 9 a.m. Wednesday morning, hours before the event was closed to the public, Turning Point denied all media credentials for the event. Foster Nicholas, editor-in-chief of Baylor's student paper, the Baylor Lariat, was told they were denied for the interest of their students. TPUSA officials refused to clarify what that meant. Since the event was eventually limited to students only, Nicholas and his team made the decision to attend anyway.
We are there as students, and afterward, we are students who are reporting on the event, not as media, but as students, as a student publication, trying to do our best to keep our interest group of students on campus informed about what was going on.
The Lariat had 6 reporters outside the event, 10 reporters at an alternate event, and 6 reporters attending the Turning Point event. Kyle Perry is a second-year Truett Seminary student. He attended the event Wednesday with one question in mind.
How do they reach a bunch of people who presumably are Christian, or at least in a Christian ecosphere?
He's studying to be a pastor and says he wanted to better understand how the organization uses Christianity in their messaging.
The part that I was most impressed, not in the positive way, was the excusal of some pretty harmful rhetoric, I would think, at least rhetoric that doesn't reflect Baylor's values.
He was especially surprised by one of the jokes political commentator Benny Johnson made. According to Perry, Johnson compared dealing with liberal women to wrangling pigs. At the same time, just a few buildings away in Cashin Academic Center, a coalition of progressive student groups hosted an alternative event called All Our Neighbors.
The goal of the event is not to counter it, but to provide an alternative space for all the marginalized students as faculty and staff here at Baylor.
Hannah Al-Hayek was one of the student organizers of the event.
But it's important for all Baylor students to understand that, you have a voice here at Baylor and you have people fighting for your right to be here.
Key speakers included Human Rights Campaign President Kelly Robinson and Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch, who both identify as gay. While the event wasn't targeting only LGBTQ+ students, it did mark the first time student organizers were approved to host high-profile gay advocates on campus. Al-Hayek told KWBU that was only possible because student organizers were able to leverage public criticism of the more conservative event.
It put Baylor in a spot to accept both sides of the spectrum.
But because of the university's approval of the event, the Baptist General Convention of Texas is reviewing their relationship with Baylor. That relationship dates to the university's creation, though it has changed over time. According to Baylor's ticket scans, the All Our Neighbors event drew about 270 attendees, though event organizers estimated closer to 400 attendees. In contrast to the political jabs thrown in Waco Hall, speakers at Cashin led faculty, staff, and students in a call to action focused around the Christian calling to love all neighbors. After the event, many traveled to the Burleson Quad to continue that discussion.
I think there's more that we have in common than we have differences.
Seth Bullard is a master's student at Baylor. He says events like All Our Neighbors and Turning Point help students reevaluate their own opinions.
It's good to have that dialogue. Ultimately, I think that's what we want more of on campus.
But not all students agree. Kyle Perry, the seminary student that attended the Turning Point event, says he's not sure that Baylor should be hosting such controversial events.
For us to welcome those two events, it feels like a little bit of an abandonment of the mission.
In a statement Wednesday, the university said it's, quote, committed to ensuring open dialogue and the exchange of ideas and perspective, unquote, but that the institution did not endorse the views of any of the speakers. In Waco, I'm Molly Jo Tilton.
Finally, Earth Week 2026 concludes Saturday as Texas residents continue to watch the state's developing water crisis and drought conditions. There's one more thing to watch, an environmental docuseries that combines conservation with day tripping. KEDT's Rob Boskamp has more.
This year's Earth Day has come to a close, but Environmental Conservancy is year-round work.
We need to understand our water system and our surrounding landscape. It's a really important thing to understand that even if we're living in the middle of downtown Corpus or Houston or Dallas or wherever, we are not separate from our ecosystems. We live in the ecosystems and we live in the watersheds, and we need to understand what those areas are.
That's Ryan Smith, Director of Water and Science for the Nature Conservancy, or TNC, in Texas. He was one of several scientists featured in the PBS docuseries Making of a Million, Day Tripping with TNC Texas. The series joins together TNC experts and Chet Garner from the PBS travel show The Day Tripper to explore more than 1 million acres of protected Texas landscapes.
The Nature Conservancy has these big, broad pieces of land where they're trying to work with nature, not necessarily rewind the clock when nature's trying to change, but seeing where it's going and learning as much as they can, and then connecting all the different pieces of Texas. You know, one thing when I was down at Sonia, I learned was how critical the water flows are 600 miles away that affect the coastal water flows. And so, you know, we say it's sort of a buzzword, all of nature is connected, but when your boot's on the ground, you see it.
Prolonged drought conditions continue to weigh on environments across the state. The docuseries looks at TNC's conservation efforts and partnerships to help find solutions to the state's environmental challenges.
We're starting to see some pretty alarming things already, and I think the key thing is that the stresses are just going to continue to worsen if we don't get smart about how we can make better water and land use decisions to help the system be more resilient.
You can watch episodes of Making of a Million, Day Tripping with the Nature Conservancy in Texas on your local PBS station. You can also replay the episodes on the Nature Conservancy's and the Day Trippers YouTube channels. For KEDT News, I'm Rob Boskamp.
This has been South Texas Midday. I'm Spencer Chiak. Your community arts calendar and more is on its way next.